The 1% Mindset: How Top Performers Think, Act and Build Lasting Success. Published by Timeless Audiobook. Introduction. Success leaves clues, but only a few choose to follow them. The difference between those who live ordinary lives and those who rise into the top 1% is not luck, talent or timing. It is the way they think, the way they act, and the standards they refuse to compromise. Long before results appear on the outside, a transformation takes place within. A new mindset is formed, one that sees opportunities where others see obstacles, one that takes responsibility instead of making excuses, and one that moves forward even when the path is uncertain. The truth is simple, yet uncomfortable. Average thinking creates average results. If you continue to think the same way, you will continue to live the same way. But the moment you begin to shift how you see the world, how you respond to challenges, and how you make decisions, everything starts to change. The 1% do not wait for perfect conditions. They do not rely on motivation. They build discipline, create structure, and execute with clarity. They understand that success is not an event, it is a process, repeated daily. In this audiobook, we will break down the core principles that shape the mindset of top performers. You will learn how to take control of your life, raise your standards, eliminate distractions, and build habits that lead to lasting success. You will discover how to think long-term while acting in the present, how to turn failure into growth, and how to become the kind of person who consistently delivers results. This is not about quick fixes or temporary motivation. This is about building a mindset that lasts, one that continues to serve you long after you finish listening. The journey ahead will challenge you, but it will also transform you if you are willing to commit. Let's begin. Chapter 1. See the gap and refuse to stay average. A quiet gap exists between where you are and where you could be, and most people never truly see it. Not because it's hidden, but because it's uncomfortable. It shows up in small moments: the decisions you delay, the standards you lower, the effort you hold back when no one is watching. The difference between the 99% and the 1% is not dramatic in a single day, but over time it becomes impossible to ignore. The 1% simply refuses to accept a life that is less than what they are capable of. They see the gap, and instead of avoiding it, they step into it. You don't accidentally become exceptional. You don't wake up one day in a different life. Everything begins with awareness. The moment you realize that your current habits, thoughts, and actions are shaping your future, you gain power. But awareness alone is not enough. Many people recognize their potential, yet remain stuck because they choose comfort over change. They see the gap, but they convince themselves it's too far, too difficult, or not worth the effort. And that is where most people stop. Ethan Walker is someone who understood this gap better than most. He was a recent graduate, living a life that looked fine from the outside. He had a stable job, a predictable routine, and a future that seemed secure. Every morning he woke up, went to work, completed his tasks, and returned home feeling tired but unfulfilled. Nothing was wrong, but nothing felt right either. Deep down, he knew he was capable of more, but like many people, he pushed that thought aside. It was easier to stay where he was than to question everything. One evening, after another repetitive day, Ethan sat in his apartment and asked himself a simple question: is this really it? That question changed everything. For the first time, he stopped avoiding the gap and started looking directly at it. He realized that his life was not the result of bad luck or limited opportunity. It was the result of his choices. He had been choosing comfort, choosing routine, and choosing safety over growth. And while those choices felt easy in the moment, they were slowly building a life he didn't truly want. That realization is where transformation begins. When you stop blaming your situation and start taking responsibility for it, you gain control. The 1% doesn't wait for inspiration or perfect timing. They act when they become aware. Ethan didn't quit his job the next day or make a dramatic move. Instead, he started small, but he started with intention. He began waking up earlier, using that time to learn new skills. He stopped wasting hours on distractions and started investing that time into something meaningful. Each day he made decisions that aligned with the person he wanted to become, not the person he had been. The gap didn't disappear overnight, but it started to shrink. That's the part most people don't understand. Change is not about one big decision, it's about consistent small ones. The 1% closes the gap daily through discipline, focus, and action. They don't need everything to be perfect, they just need to keep moving forward. And over time, those small actions compound into results that look extraordinary from the outside. You are standing in front of your own gap right now. Whether you acknowledge it or not, it's there. It exists in the difference between your current habits and the habits you know you should have. It exists in the goals you've set but haven't fully committed to. It exists in the potential you feel but haven't acted on. The question is not whether the gap exists. The question is whether you are willing to face it. Refusing to stay average is not about comparing yourself to others. It's about refusing to settle for less than your own potential. It's about deciding that you will no longer accept excuses, delays, or half-effort. It's about raising your standards and living by them even when it's inconvenient. Because the truth is, average is not a fixed place. It's a choice. And so is excellence. Ethan's life didn't change in a single moment, but his direction did, and that made all the difference. Within months, he had built skills, created opportunities, and stepped into a path that once felt out of reach. Not because he was special, but because he made a decision that most people avoid. He chose to see the gap and do something about it. Now it's your turn. Stop looking away. Stop telling yourself that you'll start later. Look at where you are, look at where you want to be, and recognize the distance between the two. That gap is not your enemy. It is your opportunity. And the moment you decide to close it, step by step, day by day, you begin to separate yourself from the crowd. Chapter 2. Raise your standards and stop settling. Your life is a reflection of what you tolerate, not what you wish for, not what you dream about, but what you consistently allow. Standards are quiet forces. They don't announce themselves, but they shape everything: your habits, your environment, your results. Every time you accept less effort, less discipline, or less focus than you are capable of, you reinforce a standard. And over time, those standards become your reality. The 1% understands this deeply. They don't wait for better outcomes. They demand better standards from themselves first. It's easy to believe that success comes from doing something extraordinary once in a while, but in truth, it comes from what you do consistently. If your standard is good enough, your results will reflect that. If your standard is excellence, even in small things, your results will eventually match that too. The difference between average and exceptional is often found in the details most people ignore: the extra effort, the extra hour, the decision to do things properly even when no one is watching. These choices may seem small, but they define who you are becoming. Marcus Reed lived with low standards for years without realizing it. He worked a job that paid just enough to get by, and he convinced himself that it was fine. He showed up on time, did what was required, and left as soon as the clock allowed. He often talked about wanting more money, more freedom, more opportunities, but his daily actions didn't reflect those desires. Deep down, he had accepted a version of life that was far below his potential, but because it felt comfortable, he never questioned it. One afternoon, during a routine meeting, Marcus watched a colleague present an idea with confidence and clarity. That colleague wasn't more talented or more experienced, but there was a clear difference in how he carried himself. He spoke with intention, prepared thoroughly, and took ownership of his work. In that moment, Marcus saw something he had been avoiding: the gap between what he was doing and what he was capable of doing. It wasn't about skill, it was about standards. That realization stayed with him. For the first time, Marcus stopped focusing on what he wanted and started focusing on what he was accepting. He saw the small compromises he made every day: arriving unprepared, avoiding challenges, choosing ease over effort. None of these decisions seemed significant on their own, but together they created a pattern, and that pattern was keeping him stuck. Raising your standards is not about making dramatic changes overnight. It starts with small, intentional decisions. Marcus didn't quit his job or suddenly become someone else. Instead, he made a quiet decision. He would no longer accept average effort from himself. The next day, he prepared for his tasks in advance. He paid attention to details he previously ignored. He spoke up when he had ideas instead of staying silent. These were simple actions, but they were driven by a new standard. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Raising your standards always does. You are stepping into a version of yourself that you are not yet used to. There is resistance, doubt, and the temptation to fall back into old habits. But the 1% pushes through that discomfort. They understand that growth requires friction. They don't wait until it feels natural. They act until it becomes natural. Over time, Marcus began to notice changes. His work improved. His confidence grew. People started to take him more seriously. Opportunities that once felt out of reach began to appear. But none of this happened because of luck. It happened because he changed what he was willing to accept from himself. He raised his standards, and his life followed. This is the principle most people overlook. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your standards. Goals are important, but they are temporary. Standards are permanent. They guide your actions every day, whether you are motivated or not. If your standards are low, no amount of ambition will save you. But if your standards are high, even average days will move you forward. Look at your own life for a moment. Where have you been settling? Where have you accepted less than what you know you are capable of? It could be in your work, your habits, your discipline, or even the way you think. These areas may seem small, but they are shaping your future, and the longer you accept them, the harder they become to change. Raising your standards is a decision. It doesn't require permission. It doesn't require perfect conditions. It simply requires honesty. You have to be willing to look at yourself without excuses and say, this is not enough. Not in a negative way, but in a way that pushes you forward. Because the moment you decide that average is no longer acceptable, everything begins to shift. The 1% does not live by convenience. They live by standards. They hold themselves accountable even when no one else does. They do the work properly, consistently, and without shortcuts, and that is what separates them. Not talent, not luck, but the refusal to settle. Marcus didn't become extraordinary overnight, but he became intentional, and that changed everything. His life began to reflect his new standards, one decision at a time, and the same is true for you. The moment you raise what you expect from yourself, you raise what you receive from life. Stop settling. Decide what you truly deserve, not based on comfort, but based on your potential. Then start living by that standard every single day. Chapter 3. Take full control and own everything. Control is not something you are given, it is something you take. The moment you begin to own your decisions, your actions, and your outcomes, your life starts to shift in a powerful way. Most people move through life reacting. They blame circumstances, other people, bad timing, or lack of opportunity. And while those things may be real, they are not the reason people stay stuck. The real reason is this: as long as you believe something outside of you is in control, you will never fully step into your own power. The 1% understands a simple truth. Everything in their life is their responsibility, whether they caused it or not. Taking full control does not mean everything is your fault. It means everything is your responsibility. That is a difficult idea to accept because it removes every excuse. It means you can no longer point fingers. It means you can no longer wait for someone to fix your situation. It puts the weight directly on you. But with that weight comes freedom. Because if everything is your responsibility, then everything is also within your ability to change. Daniel Brooks spent years believing his life was controlled by external factors. He grew up in a challenging environment, had limited opportunities, and faced setbacks that seemed unfair. As he got older, those experiences shaped how he saw the world. He often said things like, People like me don't get ahead, or I just didn't have the right chances. And for a long time, those beliefs kept him in the same place. He worked hard, but without direction. He tried to improve, but without consistency. Deep down, he felt like no matter what he did, his situation would stay the same. One day, after losing out on yet another opportunity, Daniel sat alone and replayed everything in his mind. At first, he did what he had always done. He blamed the system, the timing, and the people involved. But something felt different this time. Instead of moving on quickly, he paused and asked himself a question he had never seriously considered. What if it's me? That question was uncomfortable, but it was also powerful. For the first time, he wasn't looking outward for answers, he was looking inward. That moment marked a turning point. Daniel didn't suddenly have better circumstances, but he made a decision that changed how he approached everything. He decided that from that point forward, he would take full ownership of his life. No more blaming, no more waiting, no more excuses. If something didn't go his way, he would ask, "What could I have done better?" If he failed, he would look for lessons instead of reasons. It was a simple shift, but it completely changed his mindset. At first, this new way of thinking was difficult. Taking responsibility means facing your weaknesses. It means admitting that you could have done more, tried harder, or prepared better. That level of honesty can be uncomfortable, but it is necessary. The 1% does not protect their ego, they develop it. They are willing to look at their mistakes clearly because they understand that growth comes from awareness, not denial. As Daniel continued to apply this mindset, his actions began to change. He became more disciplined, more focused, and more intentional. He stopped waiting for opportunities and started creating them. He learned new skills, improved his habits, and took initiative in ways he never had before. Slowly but surely, his results began to reflect his new approach. It wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. The more responsibility he took, the more control he gained. This is the power of ownership. When you take full control, you stop being a passenger in your own life and become the driver. You no longer rely on external conditions to move forward. You create your own momentum. And even when things don't go as planned, you maintain control because you focus on what you can do next. Look at your own life for a moment. Where have you been giving away control? Where have you been blaming circumstances instead of taking action? These patterns may feel justified, but they are also limiting. Every time you say, "It's not my fault," you are also saying, "It's not in my control," and that belief keeps you stuck. The 1% refuses to think that way. They understand that ownership is the foundation of success. They don't wait for life to become easier, they become stronger. They don't expect perfect conditions, they create progress in imperfect ones, and most importantly, they hold themselves accountable, even when no one else does. Daniel's life did not become perfect, but it became purposeful. He no longer felt stuck, because he knew he had the ability to change his direction. That sense of control gave him confidence, not because everything was guaranteed, but because he trusted himself to figure things out. You have that same ability. The moment you decide to take full ownership of your life, everything begins to shift. You stop waiting, you stop blaming, you start acting, and with each decision, you build momentum that moves you closer to the life you want. Take control. Own everything, because when you do, you don't just change your circumstances, you change who you are becoming. Chapter 4. Reject comfort and train yourself for growth. Comfort feels safe, but it quietly keeps you stuck. It whispers that you're fine where you are, that you can wait a little longer, that effort can start tomorrow. Over time, that voice becomes familiar, and familiarity turns into habit. The problem is not comfort itself, it's dependence on it. The 1% understands that growth rarely feels comfortable in the beginning. It feels uncertain, inconvenient, and sometimes even painful. But they choose it anyway because they know that everything they want lives on the other side of that discomfort. Every time you avoid a challenge, delay a decision, or choose ease over effort, you reinforce a pattern. That pattern slowly builds a life of predictability. Nothing changes because nothing is challenged, and while that may feel stable, it comes at a cost. You begin to lose your edge. Your potential stays unused. Your confidence weakens because you're not proving anything to yourself. Comfort becomes a quiet ceiling that limits how far you can go. Ryan Mitchell lived most of his early life inside that comfort zone. He had talent, ideas, and ambition, but he rarely acted on them. He preferred routines that felt easy and familiar. When opportunities came that required risk or extra effort, he found reasons to delay. He told himself he needed more time, more preparation, or better conditions. On the surface, his life looked steady, but underneath, there was a growing sense of frustration. He knew he was capable of more, but he wasn't willing to step into discomfort to reach it. One moment forced him to confront that reality. Ryan had been offered a chance to lead a small project at work, something that could have helped him grow and stand out. Instead of accepting it, he hesitated. He worried about making mistakes, about being judged, about stepping into something unfamiliar. In the end, he declined the opportunity. Someone else took it, succeeded, and moved forward. That moment stayed with him, not because of what he lost, but because of what it revealed. He wasn't being held back by lack of ability, he was being held back by his attachment to comfort. That realization changed how he saw his life. For the first time, Ryan understood that comfort was not protecting him, it was limiting him, it was keeping him in a place where nothing meaningful could grow. And once he saw that clearly, he made a decision. He would stop choosing comfort by default and start choosing growth, even when it felt uncomfortable. The shift didn't happen overnight. It started with small actions. Ryan began doing things he had previously avoided. He spoke up more, even when he felt uncertain. He took on tasks that required him to learn quickly. He pushed himself to stay focused when his instinct was to relax. Each action felt uncomfortable at first, but he stayed with it. And something interesting began to happen. The discomfort didn't disappear, but it became manageable. What once felt difficult started to feel normal. This is how growth works. You don't wait for discomfort to go away. You train yourself to handle it. The 1% doesn't avoid hard things. They build the ability to face them. They understand that discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're moving in the right direction. Every time you push through it, you expand your capacity. You become stronger, more confident, and more capable. Most people never experience this because they retreat at the first sign of difficulty. They interpret discomfort as something negative, something to escape. But discomfort is not your enemy, it's a tool. It shows you where your limits are, and it gives you the opportunity to move beyond them. Without it, growth is impossible. Look at your own life. Where are you choosing comfort over progress? It might be in your daily habits, your work, or the goals you've been avoiding. These areas may seem small, but they are shaping your future. Every time you choose what's easy, you reinforce a version of yourself that stays the same. Every time you choose what's challenging, you build a version of yourself that evolves. Ryan's life began to change as he continued to lean into discomfort. He took on responsibilities he once avoided. He developed skills he once postponed. He became more confident, not because things got easier, but because he proved to himself that he could handle more. Opportunities started to appear, not because of luck, but because he was now prepared to step into them. The difference was not talent or timing, it was his willingness to grow. He stopped waiting for the right moment and started creating it through action. And over time, the life that once felt out of reach became something he was actively building. Rejecting comfort doesn't mean making life unnecessarily hard, it means being intentional. It means choosing actions that move you forward, even when they require effort. It means understanding that short-term discomfort leads to long-term growth, while short-term comfort leads to long-term stagnation. You don't have to change everything at once. Start with one area. Choose one action that feels slightly uncomfortable but meaningful. Do it consistently, then build from there. Over time, your tolerance for discomfort will increase, and so will your results. The 1% doesn't avoid discomfort, they use it. They understand that growth is not something that happens to them, it's something they train for, and the more they lean into it, the further they go. Now it's your turn. Stop choosing what's easy by default. Start choosing what makes you better, because the moment you shift from comfort to growth, you begin to step into a completely different life. Chapter 5. Build discipline that works without motivation. Motivation feels powerful in the moment, but it is unreliable. It comes and goes, rising when you feel inspired and disappearing when things get difficult. If your progress depends on how you feel, your results will always be inconsistent. The 1% understands this better than anyone. They don't rely on motivation to move forward. They build discipline, a system of behavior that continues regardless of mood, energy, or circumstances. Discipline is what carries you on the days when motivation is nowhere to be found. The problem with motivation is that it makes you wait. You wait to feel ready, wait to feel inspired, wait for the perfect moment. And while you're waiting, nothing changes. Discipline removes that waiting. It replaces emotion with action. It tells you that whether you feel like it or not, the work still needs to be done. And over time, that consistency becomes your greatest advantage. Jason Carter struggled with this for years. He was full of ideas and ambition, but his actions were unpredictable. Some days he would wake up energized, focused, and ready to work. On those days he would accomplish a lot, but on other days he felt tired, distracted, or unmotivated, and on those days he would do very little. This pattern created a cycle, short bursts of progress followed by long periods of stagnation. He knew he was capable of more, but he couldn't seem to maintain it. At first, Jason believed the problem was external. He thought he needed better conditions, more inspiration, or the right mindset to stay consistent. But over time, he realized that the issue wasn't his environment, it was his approach. He was relying on motivation to carry him, and motivation was failing him. That realization forced him to rethink everything. Instead of chasing motivation, Jason decided to build discipline. He started by creating a simple routine, nothing complicated, nothing overwhelming, just a set of actions he committed to doing every day. He chose a fixed time to start his work, removed distractions from his environment, and focused on completing his tasks regardless of how he felt. At first, it was difficult. There were days when he didn't want to start, days when everything felt harder than it should, but he made a decision. He would show up anyway. That decision changed everything. The more he followed his routine, the less he depended on motivation. Action became automatic. He no longer had to think about whether he should work. He simply did, and with that consistency came progress. It wasn't dramatic at first, but it was steady, and steady progress is far more powerful than occasional bursts of effort. This is the foundation of discipline. It removes the emotional debate from your daily actions. Instead of asking, "Do I feel like doing this?" you operate from a different question, "Is this what needs to be done?" That shift may seem small, but it is transformative. It allows you to move forward even when conditions are not perfect, even when your energy is low, even when your mind is full of doubt. The 1% lives by this principle. They don't negotiate with themselves every morning. They don't give themselves the option to quit when things feel difficult. They create systems that make action inevitable. Their routines are designed to eliminate excuses, and their standards ensure that they follow through. Over time, this creates a level of consistency that most people never achieve. Look at your own habits. How often do you depend on motivation to get started? How often do you delay action because you don't feel ready? These patterns may seem harmless, but they are holding you back. Every time you wait for motivation, you give up control. You allow your progress to depend on something that is constantly changing. Discipline gives you that control back. It allows you to decide what you will do and follow through, regardless of how you feel. And the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. What once required effort starts to feel natural. What once felt difficult becomes routine. Jason began to experience this shift. The actions that once felt forced started to feel normal. His productivity increased, his confidence grew, and his results began to reflect his consistency. He no longer felt stuck in cycles of progress and regression. He had built a system that worked every day, not just on the days when he felt motivated. The key is to start simple. You don't need to overhaul your entire life at once. Choose a few actions that truly matter and commit to them. Set a specific time, create a clear structure, and remove as many distractions as possible. Then follow through, no matter how you feel. Some days will be easier than others, but that's not the point. The point is consistency. Over time, those small actions will compound, they will build momentum, and that momentum will create results. And as you see those results, your confidence will grow, not because you feel motivated, but because you trust your ability to execute. Discipline is not about being perfect, it's about being consistent. It's about showing up when it's inconvenient, when it's difficult, and when no one is watching. Because those are the moments that define who you are becoming. Stop waiting to feel ready. Stop relying on motivation to carry you forward. Build discipline that works every day, in every condition, because once you do, you will no longer depend on how you feel, you will depend on what you do, and that is what separates the 1%. Chapter 6. Focus on what matters and eliminate distractions. Attention is the currency of progress, and most people spend it carelessly. Every day your focus is pulled in different directions: notifications, conversations, endless scrolling, and small meaningless tasks that feel productive but lead nowhere. The problem is not that these distractions exist. The problem is that they are accepted as normal. Over time, this scattered attention becomes a habit, and that habit slowly erodes your ability to do meaningful work. The 1% understands that focus is not just important, it is everything. Without it, even the best ideas remain unfinished. When your attention is divided, your results are diluted. You may feel busy, but being busy is not the same as being effective. You can spend an entire day working without actually moving forward. That's the trap of distraction. It creates the illusion of progress while keeping you stuck in the same place. The 1% avoids this trap by being intentional with their focus. They decide what matters most and give it their full attention, cutting out anything that does not contribute to their goals. Noah Bennett lived in a constant state of distraction. His days were filled with activity, but very little of it was meaningful. He would start working on something, only to check his phone minutes later. He would switch between tasks, convincing himself that multitasking made him efficient. At the end of each day, he felt exhausted yet unaccomplished. He knew he was putting in effort, but the results were not there. That frustration began to build, but he couldn't understand why. One afternoon, while reviewing his week, Noah noticed something that changed his perspective. He had spent hours working, but when he looked at what he had actually completed, the list was surprisingly short. Most of his time had been consumed by interruptions, small tasks, and distractions that added no real value. That realization forced him to confront the truth. His lack of focus was costing him more than he thought. From that moment, Noah made a decision. He would stop treating focus as optional and start treating it as a priority. Instead of trying to do everything, he chose to focus on fewer things that actually mattered. He identified his most important tasks and committed to giving them his full attention without interruption. This required change. He turned off unnecessary notifications, set boundaries around his time, and created a workspace that minimized distractions. At first it felt uncomfortable. He was used to constant stimulation, and the silence felt unfamiliar. His mind wandered, searching for something to distract it, but he stayed with it. He brought his attention back, again and again, and slowly something began to shift. His ability to concentrate improved. Tasks that once took hours were now completed in less time. More importantly, the quality of his work increased. This is the power of focus. When you give something your full attention, you operate at a different level. You think more clearly, work more efficiently, and produce better results. The 1% protects this ability at all costs. They understand that in a world full of distractions, the ability to focus deeply is a rare advantage. Most people never develop this skill because they never train it. They allow distractions to interrupt them constantly, and over time, their attention span weakens. They become used to shallow work, quick tasks, short bursts of effort, and constant switching between activities. But shallow work rarely leads to meaningful progress. It keeps you busy, but it doesn't move you forward. To break this pattern, you need to be intentional. Start by identifying what truly matters. Not everything deserves your attention. In fact, most things don't. The 1% focuses on a few high-impact activities and ignores the rest. They understand that saying no is just as important as saying yes. Every distraction you eliminate creates more space for what matters. Noah began to apply this principle daily. Instead of filling his schedule with random tasks, he structured his day around his most important priorities. He set specific times for deep work, where he would focus without interruption. During those periods, he removed anything that could distract him. No phone, no unnecessary tabs, no background noise. It wasn't always easy, but it was effective. Over time, his results improved dramatically. He was completing more work in less time, and the quality of that work was higher than ever. He no longer felt overwhelmed or scattered. He felt in control, and that control came from a simple shift. He decided to focus on what mattered and eliminate what didn't. Look at your own daily routine. How much of your time is spent on things that truly matter, and how much is lost to distractions that add no value? These small moments may seem insignificant, but they add up. They shape your productivity, your progress, and ultimately your results. The 1% does not leave their attention unguarded. They protect it, they train it, they use it with intention, because they know that where your focus goes, your life follows. You don't need to do more, you need to do less but better. Identify what truly matters, give it your full attention, and remove anything that stands in the way. It will feel uncomfortable at first, but that discomfort is a sign of growth, and as you continue, your ability to focus will strengthen. Focus is not just a skill, it is a decision to stop being pulled in every direction and start moving with purpose. Make that decision and you will begin to see a difference, not just in your work, but in your entire life. Chapter 7. Use your time like it actually matters. Time does not announce its value, but it quietly determines everything. Every result you see in your life is a reflection of how you have used your time, not in big, dramatic moments, but in small, repeated choices. What you focus on, what you delay, what you ignore, and what you prioritize. The truth is simple. You cannot waste time and expect a meaningful life. The 1% understands that time is not just important, it is the foundation of everything they build. Most people treat time as if it will always be there. They delay action, postpone decisions, and fill their days with activities that feel productive but lead nowhere. Hours turn into days, days into months, and before they realize it, years have passed without significant progress. It's not because they lacked ability or opportunity, it's because they never truly respected their time. Caleb Turner lived this reality without realizing it. His days were full, but not meaningful. He woke up without a clear plan, moved from one task to another, and often ended the day wondering where his time had gone. He told himself he was busy, but deep down he knew he wasn't moving forward. His goals remained ideas, always pushed to later, and that later kept getting further away. One evening, after another unproductive day, Caleb sat down and reflected on how he had spent his time. For the first time, he looked at his day honestly. He saw the hours lost to distractions, the time spent on low-value tasks, and the moments where he chose comfort over progress. Nothing stood out as a major mistake, but together, those small decisions had created a pattern, and that pattern was holding him back. That realization changed how he viewed time. He stopped seeing it as something he had plenty of and started seeing it as something he was constantly using, whether intentionally or not. From that moment he made a decision. He would start treating his time like it actually mattered. The shift began with awareness. Caleb started planning his days before they began. Instead of waking up and reacting to whatever came his way, he decided in advance what needed his attention. He identified his most important tasks and gave them priority. This simple act of planning created clarity. It removed the guesswork and allowed him to focus on what truly mattered. But planning alone was not enough. He also had to become more disciplined with how he used his time throughout the day. He noticed how easily he could lose focus, checking his phone, switching tasks, or delaying work that felt difficult. These moments seemed small, but they added up quickly, so he began to set boundaries. He created specific periods for focused work, where distractions were removed and his attention was fully directed at one task. At first, this required effort. He was not used to being so intentional with his time. There were moments when he wanted to fall back into old habits, to relax instead of push forward. But he reminded himself of what was at stake. Every hour mattered, every decision mattered, and the more he treated his time with respect, the more his results began to change. This is what the 1% does differently. They don't just manage time, they value it. They understand that time is the one resource that cannot be replaced. Money can be earned again, opportunities can return, but time, once used, is gone. That awareness changes how they act. They don't waste hours on things that don't matter. They invest their time into activities that move them forward. This doesn't mean they are always working. It means they are intentional. When they work, they focus. When they rest with purpose. They are not drifting through their days, they are directing them, and that direction is what creates results. Caleb began to experience this shift. As he continued to plan his days and protect his time, his productivity increased. He was completing important tasks consistently, making progress on goals that once felt distant. More importantly, he felt in control. He no longer wondered where his time had gone. He knew exactly how he had used it. Look at your own life. How are you spending your time each day? Not in general, but specifically. What are you doing in the hours that pass between morning and night? These moments may seem ordinary, but they are shaping your future. Every hour is either moving you closer to your goals or keeping you where you are. The 1% does not wait for more time. They use the time they already have. They understand that even small amounts of focused effort, repeated daily, can create significant results. They don't need perfect conditions, they need consistency, and that consistency comes from respecting their time. You don't need to change everything at once. Start by becoming aware. Pay attention to how you are spending your day. Identify what truly matters and give it priority. Remove or reduce the activities that do not contribute to your growth. Then commit to using your time with intention, even when it feels difficult. Over time, this approach will change everything. Your productivity will increase, your progress will become visible, and your confidence will grow, not because you found more time, but because you used it better. Time is always moving forward. The question is whether you are moving with it. Treat it like it matters, and it will start working in your favor. Ignore it, and it will quietly pass you by. Chapter 8. Execute fast and stop overthinking everything. Progress favors those who move, not those who wait. Overthinking feels productive because it gives the illusion of preparation, but in reality, it often becomes a barrier. You analyze every detail, consider every possibility, and wait for certainty that never arrives. Meanwhile, time passes, opportunities shift, and momentum fades. The 1% understands something most people struggle to accept. Clarity comes from action, not from endless thinking. They move forward before everything is perfect, and that decision gives them an advantage that compounds over time. Overthinking is often rooted in fear, fear of making mistakes, fear of being judged, fear of choosing the wrong path. These fears lead to hesitation, and hesitation leads to inaction. You tell yourself you're being careful, but what you're really doing is avoiding discomfort. The problem is that waiting does not remove risk, it increases it. The longer you delay, the more opportunities you miss, and the harder it becomes to start. Lucas Hayes lived in that cycle for years. He had ideas, plans, and ambitions, but very little to show for them. He would spend hours thinking about what he wanted to do, researching, planning, and trying to find the perfect approach. Every decision felt important, and he didn't want to get it wrong, so he waited. He refined his plans, adjusted his ideas, and told himself he would start when everything was clear, but that moment never came. Weeks turned into months, and his ideas remained unfinished. Each delay made it harder to begin. The more he thought about it, the more complicated it became. Eventually, even simple tasks started to feel overwhelming. He wasn't lacking ability, he was stuck in his own thinking. One day, after abandoning yet another project, Lucas reached a point of frustration. He realized that his problem wasn't a lack of knowledge or preparation, it was his inability to act. He had been waiting for confidence, but confidence wasn't coming because he wasn't taking action. That realization forced him to change his approach. Instead of trying to plan everything perfectly, Lucas made a simple decision. He would start before he felt ready. The next time he had an idea, he didn't spend days analyzing it. He took the first step immediately. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't feel comfortable, but it was progress. That first action broke the pattern. At first, it felt unnatural. His instinct was still to pause and think, to go back to planning and refining, but he resisted that urge. He focused on movement. One step, then another, and with each action, something began to change. The clarity he had been waiting for started to appear. Problems that seemed complicated became easier to solve. Decisions that once felt overwhelming became straightforward. This is how execution works. You don't need the full picture to begin. You only need enough to take the next step. As you move forward, you gather information, adjust your approach, and improve. The 1% understands that action creates feedback, and that feedback leads to better decisions. They don't aim for perfection, they aim for progress. Most people do the opposite. They wait for perfect conditions, perfect timing, and perfect understanding. But perfection is not a starting point. It's something that develops over time. If you wait for everything to be perfect, you will never begin. And if you never begin, nothing changes. Lucas began to build momentum. Each time he acted quickly, he reduced the space for doubt and hesitation. He no longer gave himself time to overthink. Instead, he focused on execution. And as he continued, his confidence grew, not because he had eliminated mistakes, but because he had learned to handle them. Mistakes are part of the process. The 1% does not avoid them. They expect them. They understand that mistakes are not failures, but feedback. Each mistake teaches you something, brings you closer to the right approach, and strengthens your ability to move forward. But you only gain that feedback through action. Look at your own habits. How often do you delay because you're thinking too much? How many ideas have you left unfinished because you were waiting for the right moment? These patterns may feel safe, but they are holding you back. Every time you overthink, you lose time. Every time you delay, you lose momentum. Execution is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice. Start small. When you have a task to complete, begin immediately instead of waiting. When you have an idea, take the first step without overanalyzing it. Focus on movement, not perfection. The goal is not to get everything right the first time, it's to get started. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes. Your mind will adjust. The urge to overthink will weaken, and your ability to act will strengthen. Over time, you will develop a bias toward action, a habit of moving forward instead of standing still. Lucas didn't become perfect, but he became effective. He stopped wasting time in his head and started building real results. His ideas turned into actions, and his actions turned into progress, and that progress created opportunities he once thought were out of reach. The difference was simple. He stopped overthinking and started executing. You have that same choice. You can stay in your thoughts waiting for clarity, or you can step into action and create it. The path forward is not found in thinking alone. It is built through movement. So take the first step, even if it feels uncertain, then take the next one, because in the end, it's not the perfect plan that changes your life, it's the actions you take. Chapter 9. Stay strong when pressure hits hard. Pressure reveals who you are becoming. When everything is easy, anyone can stay focused, disciplined, and confident. But when things get difficult, when expectations rise, when uncertainty increases, when results don't come as quickly as you hoped, that is when your mindset is tested. The 1% does not avoid pressure, they grow through it. They understand that pressure is not something to fear, but something to use. It forces clarity, builds resilience, and separates those who quit from those who continue. Most people react to pressure by pulling back. They doubt themselves, overthink their decisions, and look for ways to escape the discomfort. Their focus shifts from progress to protection. They try to avoid failure instead of moving toward growth, and in doing so, they limit themselves. Pressure becomes something that holds them back instead of something that pushes them forward. Adrian Cole faced this reality in a way that forced him to change. He had spent years building his career, working steadily and improving over time. Things were going well until they weren't. A sudden shift in his situation placed him under intense pressure. Expectations increased, challenges multiplied, and the margin for error disappeared. Every decision felt heavier, every mistake felt more significant. The comfort he once had was gone. At first, Adrian struggled. He felt overwhelmed, unsure of how to handle the weight of everything on his shoulders. His confidence began to shake, and his focus started to slip. He questioned whether he was capable of handling the situation. The pressure that once seemed manageable now felt suffocating, but something changed when he realized that the pressure itself was not the problem. His response to it was. He understood that trying to escape it would only make things worse. Instead, he needed to learn how to stand firm within it. That shift in perspective became the turning point. Adrian began to approach pressure differently. Instead of seeing it as something negative, he started viewing it as a test, not a test of his limits, but a test of his mindset. He asked himself a simple question: how would someone at the top handle this? That question changed how he acted. Instead of reacting emotionally, he focused on staying steady. Instead of overthinking, he focused on executing the next step. This is what the 1% does. They don't allow pressure to control them. They control their response to pressure. They stay calm when others panic. They stay focused when others get distracted. They understand that pressure is temporary, but the way you handle it creates lasting results. One of the key differences is emotional control. Under pressure, your emotions can become intense: fear, doubt, frustration. If you let those emotions guide your actions, you lose clarity. You make decisions based on how you feel instead of what needs to be done. The 1% recognizes this and chooses to respond differently. They acknowledge their emotions, but they do not let those emotions take control. Adrian practiced this daily. When he felt overwhelmed, he didn't react immediately. He paused, took a step back, and focused on what was within his control. He broke down his challenges into smaller parts, making them more manageable. Instead of trying to solve everything at once, he focused on solving one thing at a time. This approach helped him stay grounded, even when the situation felt intense. Another important shift was his perspective on difficulty. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" he started asking, "What is this teaching me?" That change turned pressure into an opportunity. Each challenge became a chance to improve, to learn, and to grow stronger. And with each experience, his confidence increased, not because things got easier, but because he became more capable. Look at your own life. How do you respond when pressure increases? Do you pull back, hesitate, and doubt yourself? Or do you step forward, stay focused, and keep moving? These moments define your trajectory. They reveal whether you are building resilience or reinforcing weakness. The truth is, pressure is unavoidable. As you grow, the stakes will rise, the challenges will become more complex, the expectations will increase, but that is not something to fear. It is a sign that you are moving forward. The key is not to avoid pressure, but to prepare for it. Preparation comes from practice. You build resilience by facing smaller challenges consistently. You train your mind to stay calm, to think clearly, and to act decisively. Over time, your capacity increases. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once caused doubt becomes an opportunity to perform. Adrian's situation didn't become easy, but he became stronger. He learned to operate under pressure instead of being controlled by it. His focus improved, his decisions became sharper, and his confidence grew, not because the pressure disappeared, but because he learned how to handle it. That is the difference. The 1% is not free from pressure, they are built by it. They use it as a tool to refine their mindset, strengthen their discipline, and elevate their performance. And because of that, they continue to move forward when others stop. When pressure hits, don't run from it. Don't let it control your actions. Stand firm, stay focused, and move forward one step at a time, because in those moments, you are not just facing a challenge, you are becoming someone stronger. Chapter 10. Turn failure into your advantage. Failure is not the opposite of success, it is part of it. Yet most people treat failure as something to avoid at all costs. They fear it, resist it, and when it happens, they take it personally. They see it as proof that they are not capable, not ready, or not good enough. This reaction is what keeps them stuck. The 1% sees failure differently. They don't attach their identity to it. They use it. They extract lessons from it, adjust their approach, and move forward stronger than before. The difference is not in how often failure occurs, but in how it is interpreted. If you see failure as a final outcome, you stop. If you see it as feedback, you continue. That single shift changes everything. It removes the fear and replaces it with curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" you begin asking, "What can I learn from this?" And that question opens the door to growth. Evan Parker experienced failure in a way that forced him to rethink everything. He had started a business with high expectations. He invested time, energy, and effort into building something he believed would succeed. At first, things seemed promising, but slowly, problems began to appear. Sales didn't grow as expected. Costs increased. Strategies that seemed solid didn't produce results. Despite his efforts, the business eventually collapsed. That moment hit him hard. It wasn't just the loss of the business, it was the emotional weight that came with it. Doubt, frustration, and disappointment all surfaced at once. He began to question his decisions, his abilities, and his future. For a while he considered walking away from everything. It would have been easier to accept defeat and avoid the risk of failing again. But as time passed, Evan started to look at the situation differently. He realized that failure had given him something he didn't have before: experience. He had learned what didn't work. He had seen mistakes firsthand, and more importantly, he had developed a deeper understanding of what success actually required. That realization shifted his mindset. Instead of seeing the failure as an ending, he started to see it as a beginning. He began to analyze what had happened, not with judgment, but with intention. He identified the decisions that led to the outcome, the areas where he lacked knowledge, and the habits that held him back. This process was not easy. It required honesty and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But it also gave him clarity. This is what the 1% does. They don't ignore failure, and they don't let it define them. They study it, they break it down, understand it, and use it as a guide for their next move. Every failure contains information, and those who are willing to learn from it gain an advantage over those who avoid it. Evan decided to try again, but this time he approached things differently. He applied the lessons he had learned. He improved his planning, strengthened his skills, and adjusted his strategies. He was not starting from zero, he was starting from experience, and that made all the difference. The second time, things were not perfect, but they were better. He made fewer mistakes, adapted more quickly, and stayed focused even when challenges appeared. The confidence he once lacked began to grow, not because he had avoided failure, but because he had faced it and learned from it. Over time, his efforts began to produce results. Failure had not set him back, it had prepared him. This is the truth most people overlook. Failure is not a barrier to success, it is a step toward it. But only if you choose to use it that way. If you allow it to stop you, it becomes a limitation. If you learn from it, it becomes an advantage. Look at your own experiences. Where have you failed? What did you take from those moments? Did you move on quickly, trying to forget them, or did you take the time to understand them? These questions matter because your response determines whether failure helps you or holds you back. The 1% expects failure. They don't aim for it, but they understand that it is part of the process. Because they take action, they expose themselves to risk, and with risk comes the possibility of mistakes. But they don't let that stop them. They use every experience to refine their approach and improve their performance. One of the most important shifts you can make is to detach your identity from your outcomes. You are not your failures. They are simply events, results of specific actions taken under certain conditions. When you separate yourself from them, you gain the ability to analyze them objectively, and that objectivity allows you to learn. Evan's journey is not unique. It reflects a pattern seen in every high performer. They fail, they learn, and they continue. They don't dwell on what went wrong, they focus on what comes next. That forward momentum is what sets them apart. You have the same opportunity. The next time you face failure, don't see it as the end, see it as information. Ask better questions, look for lessons, adjust your actions, and then move forward with more clarity than before. Because in the end, success is not built on avoiding failure, it is built on using it. Chapter 11. Build confidence by taking action daily. Confidence is often misunderstood. Many people believe it is something you must feel before you act, as if it arrives first and then allows you to move forward. But in reality, confidence works in the opposite direction. It is built through action, not before it. Waiting to feel confident before you begin is one of the most common ways people hold themselves back. The 1% understands that confidence is not a starting point, it is a result. It grows as you take action, as you prove to yourself that you can handle what's in front of you. When you avoid action, doubt increases. Your mind fills in the gaps with uncertainty, assumptions, and fear. Tasks seem bigger than they actually are. Challenges feel more intimidating than they should, but the moment you take the first step, something changes. You begin to see things more clearly. You realize that what you imagined was often worse than reality, and with each step you take, that clarity grows. Tyler Scott knew what it felt like to lack confidence. He avoided situations where he might be judged or where he might fail. He hesitated to speak up, delayed decisions, and often second-guessed himself. It wasn't that he didn't have ideas or ability, he simply didn't trust himself enough to act on them, and that lack of action kept reinforcing his doubt. The less he acted, the less confident he became. For a long time, Tyler believed he needed to fix his confidence before he could change his life. He read, learned, and waited for something to click, but nothing changed. The more he thought about it, the more stuck he felt. It wasn't until he realized that his approach was backward that things began to shift. He didn't need confidence to act, he needed action to build confidence. He started small. Instead of trying to transform everything at once, he focused on taking simple, consistent actions. He spoke up once in a meeting, even if his voice wasn't steady. He completed tasks he had been delaying. He made decisions without overthinking every detail. Each action was uncomfortable, but it was intentional, and with each step he began to gather something he didn't have before: evidence. This is how confidence is built, not through positive thinking alone, but through proof. Every time you take action and follow through, you show yourself that you are capable. That evidence accumulates. It creates a foundation that your confidence can stand on. Without action, there is no evidence, only assumptions. And assumptions are often negative. The 1% focuses on building that evidence daily. They don't wait for perfect conditions or complete certainty. They act with what they have, where they are, and as they act, their confidence grows naturally. It is not forced or artificial, it is earned. Tyler began to notice this shift. The actions that once felt difficult started to feel manageable. His hesitation decreased, his ability to make decisions improved, and most importantly, his self-trust increased. He no longer relied on how he felt in the moment, he relied on what he had proven to himself over time. This is the key difference. Confidence is not about feeling fearless, it's about trusting that you can handle whatever comes next. And that trust is built through experience. The more you act, the more experience you gain. The more experience you gain, the stronger your confidence becomes. Most people get stuck because they wait for confidence to arrive before they begin, but confidence is not something that appears out of nowhere. It is created through repetition, through showing up, taking action, and following through, even when it feels uncomfortable. Look at your own life. Where have you been waiting to feel ready? Where have you been holding back because you don't feel confident enough? These areas are not barriers, they are opportunities. Opportunities to take action and build the confidence you are waiting for. Start with something small but meaningful. Take one action that you have been avoiding. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be impressive. It just needs to be real. Then repeat that process. Day after day, action by action. Over time, those small steps will create something powerful. Tyler didn't become confident overnight, but he became consistent. And that consistency changed everything. His actions became stronger, his mindset became clearer, and his results began to reflect his effort. He no longer saw confidence as something he lacked, he saw it as something he was building. That is the shift you need to make. Stop waiting to feel confident, start acting, and let confidence follow. Because in the end, confidence is not about what you think, it's about what you do. Take action today, then do it again tomorrow. Build the habit of showing up, even when it feels difficult, because every action you take is a step toward becoming someone who no longer doubts themselves, but trusts their ability to move forward. Chapter 12. Think long-term while acting today. Short-term thinking is one of the biggest reasons people stay stuck. It pulls your attention toward immediate results, quick rewards, and instant validation. You start measuring progress by what happens today, this week, or this month. And when results don't come fast enough, frustration builds, you question your efforts, lose patience, and often give up too early. The 1% operates differently. They think in years, not days. They understand that meaningful success takes time, and they are willing to act consistently without immediate results. This doesn't mean they ignore the present. In fact, they are deeply focused on it, but their actions today are guided by a long-term vision. Every decision they make, every habit they build, every effort they put in is aligned with where they want to be in the future. They are not chasing quick wins, they are building lasting results. Brandon Lewis spent years chasing short-term outcomes. He would start something new with excitement, expecting quick progress. When things didn't move as fast as he hoped, he would lose interest and shift to something else. This cycle repeated itself over and over. He was always busy, always trying, but never truly progressing. His efforts were scattered, and his results reflected that. At some point, Brandon realized that his problem wasn't a lack of effort, it was a lack of direction. He was focused on what he could get quickly, instead of what he could build over time. That realization forced him to change how he approached his goals. He began by defining a long-term vision, not something vague, but something clear and meaningful. He asked himself where he wanted to be in 5 years, what kind of life he wanted to create, and what kind of person he needed to become to get there. This vision became his guide. It gave his actions purpose. But the real shift came in how he connected that vision to his daily behavior. Instead of chasing immediate results, he focused on consistent action. He broke his long-term goals into smaller steps and committed to working on them every day. He stopped expecting quick outcomes and started valuing steady progress. At first, this approach felt slow. There were days when it seemed like nothing was happening. The results were not visible, and it was tempting to go back to his old habits of chasing quick wins. But he reminded himself of his vision. He understood that what he was building required time, and he chose to stay consistent. This is where most people struggle. They want long-term success, but they expect short-term results. When those results don't appear, they lose focus. The 1% avoids this trap by trusting the process. They know that small, consistent actions, repeated over time, create powerful outcomes. Brandon started to see this for himself. After weeks of consistent effort, small improvements began to appear. His skills improved, his habits strengthened, and his progress became noticeable. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and over time, those small improvements began to compound. This is the power of thinking long-term while acting today. You don't need to see immediate results to know you're moving in the right direction. You need to trust that your actions, if consistent and aligned, will produce results over time. That trust allows you to stay focused, even when progress feels slow. The 1% builds with patience. They are not in a rush, but they are not passive either. They act every day with intention and consistency. They understand that success is not a single moment, it is the result of thousands of small decisions made over time. Look at your own approach. Are you focused on quick results, or are you building something that lasts? Are your daily actions aligned with where you want to be in the future, or are they driven by immediate rewards? These questions matter because they determine the direction of your life. If you want lasting success, you need to shift your perspective. Stop measuring progress by what happens instantly. Start measuring it by your consistency. Are you showing up every day? Are you doing the work that matters, even when it doesn't feel exciting? That is where real progress happens. Brandon's life began to change as he continued this approach. His results improved, not because he found a shortcut, but because he stayed consistent. He built something that lasted, instead of chasing something temporary, and that made all the difference. The future you want is not created overnight. It is built through daily actions, repeated over time. Every choice you make today is shaping that future. Whether you realize it or not, you are always building something. So think long-term, define where you want to go, then act today with clarity and intention. Don't wait for perfect results. Focus on consistent effort, because in the end, it's not what you do once that matters, it's what you do repeatedly. And if you stay consistent long enough, the results you once imagined will become your reality. Chapter 13. Build systems that guarantee progress. Goals give you direction, but systems move you forward. Most people rely heavily on goals. They set targets, get excited, and feel motivated at the beginning. But over time, that motivation fades, and without a structure to support consistent action, progress slows down or stops completely. The 1% understands that goals are important, but they are not enough. What truly creates results is a system, a repeatable process that ensures you keep moving forward, regardless of how you feel. A goal tells you where you want to go. A system determines how you get there. Without a system, your progress depends on your mood, your energy, and your circumstances. Some days you move forward, other days you don't. That inconsistency is what keeps most people from achieving what they set out to do. But when you build a system, you remove that uncertainty. You create a structure that makes action automatic. Nathan Foster learned this lesson the hard way. He was ambitious, driven, and full of goals. He wanted to improve his career, build better habits, and create a more productive life. He would set clear targets, write them down, and feel motivated to pursue them. But after a few days or weeks, that motivation would fade. His actions became inconsistent, and his goals remained unfinished. This cycle repeated itself over and over. At first, Nathan thought the problem was a lack of discipline. He blamed himself for not being consistent enough, but the more he reflected on it, the more he realized that the issue was not his effort, it was his approach. He was relying on motivation and willpower, instead of creating a system that supported his actions. That realization changed everything. Instead of focusing on what he wanted to achieve, Nathan began focusing on what he needed to do daily to get there. He shifted his attention from outcomes to processes. For each goal, he asked himself a simple question: what actions, if repeated consistently, would lead to this result? From there, he started building systems. He created a morning routine that set the tone for his day. He established specific times for focused work. He broke down larger goals into smaller, manageable tasks that he could complete consistently. These systems were not complicated, but they were intentional. At first, it required effort to follow them. There were moments when he didn't feel like sticking to the routine, when distractions pulled his attention, or when he felt tempted to skip a step. But because the system was clear, he didn't have to think about what to do. He simply followed the structure he had created. This is the power of systems. They reduce decision-making. Instead of constantly asking yourself what you should do, you already know. That clarity saves mental energy and makes it easier to stay consistent. The 1% uses systems to remove friction from their daily actions. They don't rely on discipline alone. They design their environment and routines in a way that supports their goals. Over time, Nathan began to see the impact of this shift. His actions became more consistent. He no longer had periods of intense effort followed by inactivity. Instead, he moved forward steadily, day after day. The results didn't come instantly, but they came consistently, and that consistency created momentum. Momentum is what turns small actions into significant results. When you follow a system, each action builds on the previous one. Progress compounds. What once felt slow begins to accelerate, and before you realize it, you have created something meaningful. Most people underestimate the power of this approach because it doesn't feel dramatic. There are no sudden breakthroughs, no instant transformations, but that is exactly why it works. It is sustainable. It allows you to keep moving forward without burning out. Look at your own approach. Are you relying on goals alone, or do you have systems in place to support them? Do you know exactly what actions you need to take each day, or are you deciding as you go? These questions matter because your consistency depends on your structure. If you want to build a system, start simple. Choose one area of your life where you want to improve. Identify the key actions that lead to progress in that area. Then create a routine around those actions. Make it specific and repeatable. The goal is not to make it perfect, but to make it consistent. Nathan continued to refine his systems over time. He adjusted what didn't work, improved what did, and kept building on his progress. His life became more organized, more focused, and more productive. But more importantly, he felt in control. He no longer depended on motivation or external factors. He had created a structure that worked for him. That is the difference. The 1% does not leave progress to chance. They design it. They build systems that guide their actions and ensure they keep moving forward. And because of that, they achieve results that others struggle to maintain. You don't need to rely on willpower alone. You can create systems that make success easier, more consistent, and more predictable. Start small, stay consistent, and refine as you go, because in the end, it's not your goals that determine your success, it's the systems you follow every day. Chapter 14. Upgrade your circle and raise your standards. The people around you influence more than you realize. Their habits, their mindset, their expectations, they quietly shape how you think, what you accept, and what you believe is possible. You may not notice it day to day, but over time, your environment becomes a reflection of your circle. The 1% understands this deeply. They are intentional about who they spend time with because they know that proximity influences performance. If you surround yourself with people who settle, you will begin to settle. If you surround yourself with people who grow, you will begin to grow. Most people choose their circle by convenience. It's based on familiarity, comfort, or history. They stay connected to people who feel easy to be around, even if those relationships don't push them forward. There's nothing wrong with comfort, but when comfort becomes the only standard, growth slows down. You begin to normalize behaviors that keep you stuck. Conversations revolve around problems instead of solutions, excuses instead of action, and limitations instead of possibilities. Derek Collins lived in that environment for years. His circle was made up of people he had known for a long time. They were familiar, supportive in their own way, but not growth-oriented. Their conversations rarely challenged him. They spent more time talking about what they wished they had than what they were actively building. At first, Derek didn't question it. It felt normal. But over time he started to notice something. He wasn't moving forward. He had goals, ideas, and ambitions, but they didn't seem to gain traction. Whenever he tried to push himself, he felt a subtle resistance. Not direct discouragement, but a lack of alignment. The people around him weren't moving in the same direction, and that made it harder for him to stay focused. It wasn't intentional, but it was influential. One moment shifted his perspective. Derek attended a small event where he met people who approached life differently. They spoke with clarity, took responsibility for their actions, and focused on growth. Their conversations were different. They talked about ideas, strategies, and progress. They asked better questions. They challenged each other in a way that felt constructive, not critical. For the first time, Derek experienced what it felt like to be in a growth-driven environment. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was energizing. He realized that the difference wasn't just in what these people were doing, it was in how they were thinking, and that realization stayed with him. After that experience, Derek began to evaluate his circle, not with judgment, but with awareness. He asked himself whether the people around him were helping him grow or keeping him where he was. The answer was clear, and with that clarity came a decision. Upgrading your circle does not mean cutting people off or distancing yourself in a negative way. It means being intentional about who influences your thinking and your behavior. Derek didn't abandon his old relationships, but he changed how much time and energy he invested in them. At the same time, he actively sought out people who were aligned with his goals. He began attending events, joining groups, and connecting with individuals who were focused on growth. These interactions were different. They required more effort, more engagement, and more accountability. But they also pushed him to improve. Being around people with higher standards naturally raised his own. This is how influence works. You don't have to force yourself to grow when you are surrounded by people who are already doing it. Their actions set a standard. Their mindset challenges yours. Their consistency inspires you to match it. Over time, you begin to adopt similar habits, similar thinking patterns, and similar expectations. The 1% is intentional about this. They understand that environment is not just physical, it is social. It is the conversations you have, the ideas you are exposed to, and the standards that are normalized around you. They choose environments that support their growth, even if it requires discomfort. Derek began to experience this shift. His thinking became sharper. His actions became more consistent. He felt more accountable, not because someone was forcing him, but because the standard around him had changed. He no longer wanted to settle, because he was no longer surrounded by people who did. Look at your own circle. Who are you spending the most time with? What kind of conversations are you having? Are those interactions pushing you forward or keeping you in the same place? These questions are not about judgment, they are about awareness. Because the people around you are influencing your direction, whether you realize it or not. You don't need a large circle, you need the right one. Even a few people who are focused, disciplined, and growth-oriented can make a significant difference. Seek out those individuals, learn from them, engage with them, let their mindset challenge your own. At the same time, raise your own standards within your existing relationships. Bring better conversations, ask better questions, lead by example. Sometimes your growth can influence others to grow as well. Derek's life didn't change overnight, but his direction did. By upgrading his circle, he upgraded his mindset, and that mindset began to shape his actions and his results. He became more intentional, more focused, and more aligned with the person he wanted to become. The people around you matter. They shape your standards, your habits, and your expectations. Choose them wisely, because when you surround yourself with growth, you don't have to force progress. It becomes part of your environment. Chapter 15. Become the person before you achieve the results. Results are visible, but identity is what creates them. Most people focus on outcomes. They want success, recognition, financial freedom, or a better life. But they approach it from the outside in. They try to change their results without changing who they are. The 1% understands a deeper truth. You don't get the results first and then become the person. You become the person first and then the results follow. This is where most people get stuck. They say they want success, but their habits, their thinking, and their standards are still aligned with who they used to be. They wait for external change to give them confidence, discipline, or clarity. But those qualities are not given by success. They are built before it. If you don't change your identity, your results will always return to what feels familiar. Sean Murphy struggled with this without realizing it. He had clear goals and strong ambition. He wanted to improve his life, build something meaningful, and move beyond the limitations he felt. He would take action in short bursts, working hard for a few days, staying focused for a period of time, but it never lasted. Eventually, he would fall back into old habits. It wasn't a lack of effort, it was a lack of identity. He still saw himself as someone who procrastinated, someone who needed motivation, someone who wasn't fully disciplined, and because of that, his actions reflected that identity. Even when he tried to change, it felt temporary. He was acting differently, but he wasn't thinking differently, and that gap kept pulling him back. One day, after repeating the same cycle again, Sean stopped focusing on what he wanted to achieve and started focusing on who he needed to become. That shift changed everything. Instead of asking, "What do I need to do to succeed?" he asked, "What would the person I want to become do in this situation?" That question became his guide. At first, it felt uncomfortable. The answers required more effort, more discipline, and more consistency than he was used to. But he committed to it. When he didn't feel like working, he reminded himself that the person he wanted to become would still show up. When he faced distractions, he chose focus because that aligned with his new identity. Each decision was small, but it was intentional. This is how identity is built, not through words, but through repeated actions. Every time you act in alignment with the person you want to become, you reinforce that identity. Over time, it becomes natural. What once felt forced begins to feel normal, and that is when real change happens. The 1% operates from identity, not emotion. They don't ask themselves how they feel, they ask themselves who they are, and that identity drives their actions. They show up consistently, not because they are always motivated, but because it is part of who they are. Discipline is not something they try to have, it is something they embody. Sean began to experience this shift as he continued to act in alignment with his new identity. His habits became stronger, his focus improved, his consistency increased, but more importantly, his self-perception changed. He no longer saw himself as someone who struggled, he saw himself as someone who followed through. This change in identity created a change in results. The actions that once felt difficult became automatic. The progress that once felt slow began to accelerate. Opportunities appeared, not because of luck, but because he was now prepared to step into them. He had become the person who could handle them. This is the key. Results require a certain level of identity. If you try to achieve them without becoming that person first, they will not last. Even if you reach them temporarily, you will struggle to maintain them. But when your identity matches your goals, your actions become consistent and your results become sustainable. Look at your own life. Who do you currently believe you are? Not what you want to be, but what you consistently show through your actions. Are your habits aligned with the person you want to become, or are they keeping you tied to your past? Change begins with awareness. You have to recognize the gap between your current identity and your desired one. Then you begin to close that gap through action. Not by waiting, not by wishing, but by deciding and acting. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need external validation. You need to start acting like the person you want to become. Make decisions from that perspective. Choose discipline over comfort. Choose focus over distraction. Choose growth over ease. Sean didn't wait for results to confirm his change. He committed to becoming first, and as he did, the results followed naturally, not instantly, but inevitably, because his actions were now aligned with his identity. This is the final shift. Stop chasing results as if they exist outside of you. Start building the identity that creates them, because in the end, success is not something you achieve, it is something you become. Conclusion. Everything you've heard in this audiobook leads to one simple truth. Success is not an event, it is a way of living. It is not something you wait for, hope for, or stumble into. It is something you build, one decision at a time, one habit at a time, one standard at a time. The difference between the 99% and the 1% is not as wide as it seems. It is found in the small things most people overlook. The choices made when no one is watching, the discipline shown when motivation is gone, and the consistency maintained when progress feels slow. You have seen what it takes. You have seen how the 1% thinks differently, acts with intention, and refuses to settle for average. They take full ownership of their lives. They reject comfort when it holds them back. They build discipline instead of waiting for motivation. They focus deeply, use their time wisely, and execute without hesitation. They stay strong under pressure, learn from failure, and build confidence through action. They think long-term, create systems, surround themselves with growth, and most importantly, they become the person before expecting the results. None of this is complicated, but it requires commitment, not a temporary burst of effort, but a consistent approach to how you live your life. The truth is, you are already building your future every single day. Through your habits, your mindset, and your decisions, you are shaping who you are becoming. The question is not whether you are changing, the question is in which direction. There will be days when it feels difficult, days when progress is not visible, days when it would be easier to fall back into old habits. In those moments, remember this: growth is not always obvious, but it is always happening when you stay consistent. The results you want are being built beneath the surface, long before they appear on the outside. You don't need to change everything at once, you need to start. Choose one principle, one habit, one action, and commit to it. Then build from there. Let your actions reflect the person you are becoming, not the person you used to be. Over time, those actions will compound into something powerful. The 1% is not reserved for a select few, it is a choice. A choice to raise your standards, to take control, and to live with intention. A choice to stop settling and start building. A choice to become someone who follows through, no matter the circumstances. You already have what you need to begin. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. Because the life you want is not waiting somewhere in the future. It is being created by what you do today. So take control, stay consistent, keep moving forward. And remember, success is not something you chase, it is something you become.